Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Book Tastings. I am Jessica over at the circulation desk, and we will be reading The Edge of In Between by Lorelei Savaryn. This is a retelling of the classic story, The Secret Garden, and if you want to see an update on a modern update on a classic, this would be a good read for you. The fall fires burned in all the parks across Vivelle, dotting the city with pockets of glow. They turned leaves to ash and sent a warm, woody aroma winding through the busy streets. A tiny cyclone lifted into the alleyway beside Lottie, twisting leaves the color of fire and goldenrod and umber through the air faster and faster until they blurred together. The wind stopped and the leaves settled, nestling back onto the pavement. Lottie stepped on one and smiled as it gave a satisfying crunch. She breathed in deeply. Her nose had taken on a hint of pink in the chilly wind, but she didn't mind the cold. It only meant that winter crept closer from the north, readying itself to wrap Vivelle, the capital of the land of the living, in an embrace built of steaming hot cocoa and glimmering icicles and bright snow. Each of the seasons held a special place inside Lottie's heart. Each had its own scents, sights, flavors, and best of all, colors. Colors she would run home and mix up until she created just the right shades to paint a scene from her day and present it to her parents. Lottie's gallery, the long hall that separated the living spaces from their bedrooms, rotated its collection each season. It was now nearly packed to the brim with images of foliage and pumpkins, brown leather coats and hands tucked into pockets, bright red apples and acorns fallen from a tree. Lottie's fingers itched, longing to get her paints so she could try to recreate the way the leaves had smudged together as they spun in the air. She peered in through the wide front window of Felicity's Enchanted Treats, a shop that was always crowded, regardless of the season. In the fall, they sold sticky buns and cider. In the winter, candied nuts and the best hot cocoa in town. Spring was sugar cookies and tea made from flowers that bloomed in hot water. And summer, of course, was ice cream and lemonade. Lottie allowed her gaze to roam the line of patrons inside the shop until she found her father at the checkout, getting ready to pay. Her mouth watered and her eyes lit up at the sight of the steam rising and swirling from the cups on the counter. A treat and a walk through the park before supper, their weekly tradition, was well underway. Ouch! Lottie startled as someone knocked into her shoulder from behind, sending her stumbling. She reached her hands out and braced herself against the wall of Felicity's shop, the color of which had been enchanted to change with the seasons. She could tell instantly it had been done by an artist with magic, the kind Lottie hoped to be someday. Today it was a deep burgundy that echoed the color of the remaining leaves on the lines of maples across the street. Lottie regained her footing and whipped her head around until she spied the woman, one of the living gray, in a long cloud gray trench coat and steel-colored scarf and hat. The woman tucked her neck into her shoulders and shuffled down the sidewalk, the magic inside her a faint flickering yellow as thin and as fragile as a butterfly's wings. Lottie's heart hurt for the woman more than any bump to the shoulder ever could. The people who kept their pigment and their magic glowing strong remained speckled brightly around her, moving briskly, eyes held high and filled with purpose, while throngs of living gray muddled slower and wearier through the streets. Lottie sighed. How very sad it would be to lose one's color, to have one's magic dim and fade. She touched a hand to her chest at the warmth tucked away beneath her ribs, where her own magic glowed and gleamed the color of melted gold. Colors could hold so very many things. Feelings, for one. Black thunderclouds of anger or canary yellow hope. Seething red envy or wild wishes tucked into a purple haze. They could hold memories, her easel set up under the falling pink blossoms of a cherry tree on a spring day, the sandy color of the crust on her mother's mixed berry pie, the coral skies at sunset on the shores of Vivelle's endless sea. And colors also held magic. Everyone everywhere had magic, or at least they were born with it. That was just the way it was, a gift from the great magician tethering the world's people to its power. Part of Lottie's gift was seeing the color in others, seeing the glowing magic inside them, or if it had faded, what was left of it once they turned living gray. Here, kiddo. Lottie's father slipped a warm cup of cider into her cold hands. Thanks. Lottie took a sip. letting the tart, spicy drink coat her tongue. But something else was there, too. Something warm and sweet. Her eyes lit up. You added caramel! Her father's blue-green eyes crinkled at the edges as he smiled. If I know one thing to be true, it's that caramel makes everything taste better, especially in the fall. Lottie couldn't argue with him there. She mentally listed all the good caramelly things in the season: caramel apples, caramel corn, salted caramel chocolates. A person could never get too much caramel this time of year. And now, to the park. Her father thrust an arm up like he had just given some sort of bold rallying cry. The poorly sewn brown leather elbow patches on his tweed coat stood out even when he kept his arms at his sides. He worked hard, long hours at his job, using his gift of thinking to solve all sorts of Yvel's trickiest problems. He knew the coat looked silly, but he'd had it forever and said it helped him think. The pine-colored magic glowing inside his chest was one of her favorite magics of all, but all that brain work made him a bit goofy at the end of the day. To the park, Lottie giggled. She found her father's free hand with her own, and they waited for a break in the congestion of the evening traffic before scurrying across the streets into city greens. The park wasn't enchanted itself, though one could find enchanted things inside it, if you knew where to look. From there they would make their way home to Lottie's mother and to supper. They passed by more than a few fall fires along the way, burning in wide iron bins, a smattering of living gray huddled around each one, firelight reflecting off their smoky faces. Over time, most people lost both their color and their magic and joined the ranks of the living gray. Some faded quickly as they faced something shocking and sudden, but for others it happened slowly and painfully as years went by. Maybe things didn't work out for them the way they had hoped, or their dreams were deferred. A person could become living gray, losing both their pigment and also their ability to see color around them from any number of disappointments. But as a person faded, one thing was certain: their magic faded too. It was still there, but too weakened to add to the world all the beauty and goodness for which it had been created. A faded person survived, and survived only, all thoughts of living something richer and fuller having been swallowed up by the gray. The living gray could also still benefit from those who kept their magic and from the enchanted things that magic created, but they were spectators, not participants. And watching something and having it be a part of you were two very different things. Some even looked down on those who carried their magic well into adulthood, whispering about them behind their backs like they were silly children. Oh, what sweet dears, when will they ever grow up and join the rest of us in the real world? Lottie shook her head and pulled her hand away from her father's, which rushing to rub at the hair on her arms that stood on end whenever her mind drifted towards sad, colorless things. Though she couldn't help it from time to time, couldn't stop herself from trying to see inside the living gray, to unearth what magic might be there, left there, to find what remained of the color that had once glowed bright inside their chests. Hope and magic were tangled together in the most beautiful of knots, her father often said, and Lottie was certain it couldn't be that hard to keep it if a person wanted it badly enough. But she wouldn't have to worry about that. She had a gift, and each day she grew in her skill and ability to use it. She had her family, her cozy apartment, her pain-filled room. Her parents had each kept their magic, and so had most of their family friends. Nanny Nellie, who had helped take care of Lottie for the past 5 years, was another story. But Lottie had grown a stubborn determination to accept her sourness as something endearing. It wasn't Nellie's fault she'd turned gray. Her tiny little glow shone the color of a clementine plucked fresh from the tree. It would have been so very beautiful if she hadn't lost nearly all of it when she faded. Now it only gave a small spark inside of her on occasion when she closed her eyes as a symphony built to a crescendo on a string-filled stage, or lost herself in staring at the sunset across Yvel's skyline. It was a rare, fleeting thing. Both Lottie and her father slowed as they approached the wide green space at the center of the park. Lottie's father's eyes, the window to his thoughts and feelings, clouded over like they always did when they saw it, the home of the stone man. Any person who didn't know his story might think he was an art installation, a near-perfect sculpture of a man pulling his 2 children by the hands through the park. How lovely, a person might say. What a gorgeous fixture. As it was, groups of people often picnicked around him or read books on blankets or soaked in the sun in the summer, all gone numb to what the stone man meant. He wasn't an art illustration carved by an artist to add beauty to the urban green space. The stone man hadn't been carved at all. He had been made. A third option existed for the people of Yvel. One could lose one's sense of magic and wonder and become one of the living gray. One could keep one's magic and use it to make the world a better place and see the world in color for all of one's days, as Lottie planned to. Or though rare, often facing a sharp and terrible sudden change in one's life, a person could grip onto their magic so tightly that instead of fading, it snapped, splintering off from its source, the great magician itself. And the splintered magic separated from the source of goodness and beauty that had made it, without fail, manifested into something awful. It could become magic twisted into something that was never meant to be. Lottie had first learned about it years ago when she was 7 years old. The stone man had begged his magic to help him never feel pain again, her father had told her. But splintered magic lies. It's never to be trusted. The person whose magic splinters believes they can manipulate it to relieve their suffering in the way they think is best. But magic isn't meant to be separated from the source. It always comes at a cost, and there's always a catch. First, the man's heart was turned to stone, slowly over time. Then his stone heart pumped stone blood through his veins. The stone blood began to infect his organs and ran into the park to seek help from someone whose magic hadn't splintered, pulling his children along with him. But the stone spread like poison through his limbs and then onward to the little ones at his side. And just like that, he would never feel pain again. In fact, he wouldn't feel anything at all. As good and beautiful as magic had the potential to be, Lottie's father had warned her how ugly and bad it would get when it turned. A splinter was a ticking clock toward destruction, and those who splintered never survived. And so even though they had to cross this part of the park to get home, Lottie and her family never came here to play. They gave the stone man and his children a wide berth and didn't speak again to each other until they had exited the clearing. Lottie finished her cider and set her now empty cup in the reprocessor, a magical bin that compacted garbage and, using both magic and heat, transformed it into moldable, reusable material. It had been a Warwick invention, and Henry Warwick of Yvel had been one of the best magical engineers of their time, so much so that Lottie had sat through an entire lesson devoted to him in school. But he disappeared over a decade prior, yet another tragic story of magic that had splintered, leaving only wreckage in its wake. Lottie's father tossed his cup in as well, just as Lottie tagged him, swiping her arm playfully across his shoulder. She gave a devious grin and shouted, "Can't catch me," before sprinting down the path. She didn't have to look back at her father's eyes to know the cloud had lifted. She didn't linger on sad things for overly long. Her gift was to look forward to solve problems. He spent his energy on the things he could change, and he found ways to change them for the better. Right now, he was looking forward at his daughter, joining her in the game of chase. Lottie's mother's chestnut waves hung like a curtain across her cheek. She leaned over the counter, examining a recipe torn from a piece of notebook paper. Her glasses perched on her nose, and an open cookbook rested on a stand beside the stove. The warm scent of roast beef and carrots and potatoes floated through the air. Lottie ran to her and inhaled the scent of vanilla and gardenia as she folded into a big mom-sized hug. A full, beautiful fall arrangement of flowers rested on the counter to Lottie's right. Burning orange blooms surrounded by deep chocolate sprigs. That was her mother's gift. She could literally create beauty from and work magic with nature, and flowers were her specialty. She made bouquets and floral arrangements for people all over Yvel, and always brought home the extras to fill their apartment. Lottie's mother's magic glowed the soft, sweet purple of lavender. "How was cider?" "Good," Lottie said, pulling away from the hug and seating herself on the chair at the counter. "I beat Dad in chase." "I'm getting old," her father said, holding his hand to his chest in fake affliction. "Well, you'd better bolster your strength," her mother teased. "You've got an award to accept tomorrow, and you need to look the part of honoree." "They're rewarding my brain," said her father, "not my body, remember, and my brain is very ready to accept the award." Lottie's mother laughed, a sound like fine glitter wafting through the air. Then she pulled the roast out of the oven. Her father was so good at his work that he was receiving Yvel's Innovation Award the following night at City Hall. Lottie didn't always understand how her father's mind worked. She wasn't much like him in that way. She felt more than she thought, leading into her heart more than in her mind, and her heart swelled with pride at the thought of him winning an award for using his gift to make Vivelle a better place, even if it meant her parents would be out late the next evening. Nellie will be here when you get home tomorrow. Her mother ran a hand through Lottie's own chestnut-colored, slightly wavy hair as she gave the reminder. You can have leftovers for dinner, and you can paint for a while once you finish your homework. What time? Lottie asked as her chest tightened. She was used to Nellie watching her for a few late afternoons each week, but her parents were rarely out for a whole evening. She cleared her throat. What time will you be home? I bet around 9 o'clock, 10 at the latest, her father said, joining her at the counter and sneaking a roasted carrot from the steaming plate. Okay, Lottie not so sneakily snuck a carrot too, but you have to promise to come in and kiss me goodnight. Of course, her mother said, with a small smile as she also snatched an early bite, but you had better be asleep. After dinner, Lottie took down several jars of paint from the shelf along her wall, which she would start with as her base colors. Then she grabbed a fresh palette. She got to work adding in a little here, a little there, mixing them together until she had replicated the colors of the leaf cyclone from outside the tree shop well enough to start. She quickly fell into a rhythm, first building in the background of the sidewalk in the corner of Felicity's shop and working forward from there. The magic warmed in her chest and worked its way through her, tying her heart to her hands. Time slipped by as Lottie worked, as the image on the paper formed and the light outside her house dimmed to dark. She swished a few final strokes and set the brush down and lifted the painting. Lottie's heart leapt inside her as the painted leaves flickered, then fluttered, then swirled in front of her eyes exactly as they had while she waited for her father. She could even catch a hint of the scent of cider emanating out from the enchanted painting, and could hear the low murmur of the late afternoon streets. And like all of her art, this painting felt exactly like the moment she captured, the flurry of the city, the contentment, the comfort of a delightfully predictable afternoon. A final painting for this season's collection. She set it down to dry and leaned back in her chair. Warmth flowed through her, pulsing in her fingertips from the use of her magic. Soon enough, she'd fall into a contented sleep. Lottie pulled herself up and changed into her pajamas before crawling into bed. A few minutes later, her parents stopped by to tuck her in, say their goodnight, and give her a kiss on the cheek. As soon as they left, Lottie pulled a well-worn book from the shelf into her headboard, The Enchanted Garden. It had been hers ever since she was a baby, a gift from her mother, and was a bedtime story favorite. The deep green color and golden letterings winked in the light of her bedside lamp. She cracked the weary spine open and reveled in the bright illustrations. Then she read, for the 100th or maybe even the 1000th time, the story of a magical garden that grew wild and free, spilling over its stone walls and spreading throughout the whole entire world. A garden that gave magical gifts and healed broken hearts. The book started with a riddle, one Lottie didn't fully understand. The gray words were printed in large angled letters on the center of the first page and were surrounded by an illustration of a desolate gray stone wall. Leafless gray ivy crept across the stone at all angles and nearly hid the wall behind it. It was all very strange for a book with life and color bursting from all the pictures. The riddle read, there was once a door that wasn't a door, and a bed that wasn't a bed, where mossy green carpet shot up from the floor. This key with the heart must be blank. It's okay if it takes some time to figure out what things mean, her mother had said one night when Lottie had asked about it. It had been years ago, back in the days when they read The Enchanted Garden together as a bedtime story. Sometimes answers don't come until you ask the right questions. Lottie had nodded and snuggled into her mother's shoulder. Truth be told, Lottie had thought about the strange riddle very rarely since, caught up in all the other more important, bright, and beautiful things she had to do, like collecting color. And collected she did. Lottie collected color in far more than just jars of pigment or on paint-stained fingers. She looked for it everywhere, gobbling up in books and films and art some more. She breathed it in and lived it out. She drank it through her eyes. Her magic flowed inside her as easily and fully as the wind wound through the trees, and she would never, ever let it go. Thank you for joining us for book tastings tonight. We hope that you are able to take a look at this book and you can see for yourself how Lottie's story will continue.